with the keyboard, I actually was getting higher scores than I would if I was playing on my gamepad. For analog control in a video game, you usually need a pad controller. Well, not anymore, because the Keychron K2HE has magnets inside, and so every single key is analog. I'm NihongoGamer. I usually cover things like handhelds and fighting games, and when I play them, I usually use something like this, a leverless arcade controller. I also use arcade sticks and pad controllers, but I don't play a lot of FPS games, and so actually I'm not that familiar with playing games on keyboard, and usually I just think of keyboards as a way to just do simple movement, but not for something complicated like analog movement. Well, when I heard that you could change the actuation point so you know exactly when the button will be actuated when you press these keys down, I was convinced that I needed to try this for fighting games, but since it's also got analog control, I decided to use it in other things like racing games as well, and I'll just spoil this ahead of time. I'm a little bit blown away by what you can do with a keyboard. Not just because every single key on here is analog, but also because you can set it as an Xbox controller, and so when I'm playing games in Steam, it actually just sees it as a gamepad. I can actually set the analog sticks to be whatever combination of keys I want to on here. But what's really blowing my mind is the way that the keyboard form factor might actually be a better way to play some of these games that I would normally just play on a pad controller. And finally, what really impressed me was the amount of functionality that they've crammed into a single keyboard at $130, where in the fighting game world, we're really used to spending anywhere between $100 and $400 on a controller that does significantly less. So prepare yourself for a wild ride, because I'm about to convince you that this magnetic wireless keyboard for $130 is better than your dedicated fighting game controller. Let's get into it. Right at the start here, I want to make it clear that this product was sent to me for the purposes of making this video. I wasn't instructed to say anything specific about it. I don't have to send it back at the end, and all opinions are my own. Alright, because I know how it feels waiting till the end, let's just show you right now Street Fighter 6 with the Keychron K2HE magnetic wireless keyboard. I'm actually using a cable now, but I'll explain that later. As you can see, I'm using it for movement left and right. I can also jump with the spacebar or down. You can set this to whatever configuration you want. It's just like a regular keyboard. But what I really want to show you is that with a very slight touch of this key, I'm already able to enter into my movement. I can have him start walking at only 1/10 of a millimeter of travel. So I think there's 4 millimeters of travel on each key, but you can actually have the actuation point set wherever you want, and even the release point set wherever you want. And in addition, you can also do rapid key triggering. We'll talk about that in a moment, but first, just want to show you that even with 1/10 of a millimeter, I instantly start moving. And as you can imagine, every millisecond counts when you're playing a fighting game. Usually, I don't worry about that sort of thing too much, but after I tried the Keychron K2HE, I was like, wow, that's immense. It's something that you don't really feel until you experience it for the first time. But you put your finger on the key and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna move left, and but it's like before I even think I'm going to move left, my character's already moving, because I'm used to feeling like it won't be until right down here at the bottom of the depression of the key that I'm going to start moving. But like instantly I'm like, okay, I might start moving. Oh wait, I'm actually already moving. So you have to be careful. If you have never used a super highly sensitive keyboard before, or if you've never used a fighting game controller with the ultra sensitive keys, this can be a little bit of a shock the first time you do it. But what's important here is that it's actually set in software. It doesn't have to be like this. If you want to go into the settings and change it so that it doesn't actuate until you actually bottom out the key at 4 millimeters, you can do that. Or you can have it actuate immediately as soon as you touch the key at 0.1 millimeters. And something you may not realize is that because there is actually more tension on each key compared to a regular keyboard, because they're not like super light and lacking in tension, the magnetic switches being used in this keyboard have quite a lot of tension on the spring, and that gives you so much more control than I was expecting. I thought like, okay, if the keys are really loose, then do I really want analog controllers? That's gonna be like a lot of tension on my fingers. But because it actually pushes back on your fingers with more tension than you would expect on a regular keyboard, you don't really have to tense up your fingers so that you maintain a large amount of control. And of course, it's not just for movement. I've also got it set for these keys as well. So literally the moment I touch this key, like I feel like the punch is already on the screen. It's kind of it's an insane experience the first time you see it. I actually lied to you. I thought it was set to 1/10 of a millimeter. It's currently set to 2/10 of a millimeter. So as you can see, as I push this analog key, you can see it being registered in the software over there, and it's green at first before it gets actuated, but as I go past the 0.2 millimeter mark, it is now actuated and orange. Now, I don't know why it's limited to 0.2 of a millimeter, but if you go over to the next option across, it's called rapid trigger. And this is very similar, but a little bit different. When you click rapid trigger, you can set all the keys to be set at the same time, and you can have them all set to 3.8 millimeters, or this time 0.1, so a single tenth of a millimeter. And if you click submit, every single key gets changed to an actuation distance of 0.1 and a release distance of 0.1. So if I turn on the trigger demo, you can see that pressing the key turns it on immediately. And if I release the key even a single tenth of a millimeter, it goes green, which means that it has been released, and then I can actually actuate it again. So I don't need to go all the way up to the top of the key to trigger. I can go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And then no matter where I am in the key, as long as I go back a tenth of a millimeter, I can now go forward a tenth of a millimeter again, and I can re-trigger the key, which means that even if I've got my key all the way down here, if I just constantly go up and down here at the base of the key, that's rapidly triggering over and over and over again. Or if I just do it at the top, right here at the top of the key like this, I'm triggering and untriggering it over and over and over again. So this is how I have it set up for fighting games, but it's so exciting because once this kind of technology is in every single controller, the tinkering is going to go mad and everyone's going to have such awesome custom setups. Let me show you. So in the rapid trigger settings, you can actually change it to advanced mode, and here, let's say that I've changed my A key over here, I can set it so that yes, it triggers after a single tenth of a millimeter, but I could actually have the reset distance set to something like 2 millimeters. So for whatever reason, I might have a specific reason why I want to do this. Maybe certain combos are being more difficult if they're too sensitive. Once I click submit over here and I go back to Street Fighter, you can see that instantly, as I ever so slightly touch the key, yes, the left input does go in, but it takes a full 2 millimeters of travel before it actually lets go, which means that if I bottom out this key all the way at 4 millimeters, and then even if I make small, tiny little movements like this, he's not stopping movement. I'm not going into neutral. I'm not releasing this key because all these subtle little movements over here, I'm not actually causing it to release until I go a full 2 millimeters through the travel, and then my character will stop. This obviously makes a lot of sense if you find that the keys are a little bit too sensitive. The way that you play is very different to other people. I feel like we're going to see so many different styles where some people only very lightly touch the keys and other people who always bottom out the keys, but then they play with their keys all the way down and they only lift their keys up a little bit as much as they need to. There's so much that can be done with the customization of the throw, the actuation distance, the release distance, the settings on these rapid triggers, keys. There's so much that can be done in the future, and I'm really excited about it. So for your normal play style, you might bottom out these keys all the way every time you're doing your special moves, or you may have faster switches with only 2 millimeters of travel and they actuate at 1.2 millimeters. And so you don't have to press them as far. But with the K2 set to 1/10 of a millimeter to actuate, I'm literally just touching these keys like this, and I'm already able to get these moves out. So literally, it's like a touchpad. I don't have to touch the key at all, and I'm already able to do all the motions required for this move. So the first benefit, of course, is that almost as soon as you've pressed the button, you've already input the move, so there's a lot of speed benefits, but also just the fact that you don't have to press the keys all the way down anymore. That's going to be a massive boon for people who just don't like the stress on their fingers, or they don't like the impact of always bottoming out the keys to make sure that they actuate every key. Whatever it is, it's just such a striking experience the first time you actually put your fingers on the keys and you're able to like do combos without actually bottoming out the whole key, or at least getting to the actuation point halfway along like a 2 millimeter or 4 millimeter travel on a key switch. Shortcuts like pressing forward and then just tapping the back button like this to do a fast dash forward, even that becomes really simple, because even if I'm bottoming out the forward direction, I only need to lightly touch this button here at the back in order to enter into the sort of super fast dash. Now, there's one feature that was on the website called last key pressed, which is a little bit like last input priority on a fighting game controller. I couldn't find this in the software anywhere, so I actually don't really know how to turn this on. But as you can see right now, if I press left and right at the same time, I get neutral, and if I press down and up at the same time, I get neutral. But in theory, the Keychron software will allow you to also do last input priority, which means that if you're pressing left and then you press right, it will give you the right input instead of going into neutral. This is not usually allowed in most tournaments, but if you're just experimenting, or if that's just how you like to play certain retro games or whatever, that should also be possible. But wait! there's more. Okay, so this is where it really gets interesting because I was not expecting to be able to play a racing game with a keyboard. But as you can see, I've got my setup like this for my acceleration here. And if I give you a little zoom in, you can see that if I press it very lightly, I move very, very slowly. And if I push all the way down, I go much faster. I can also have analog control over the brakes. I can apply very light braking, or I can brake very, very quickly, or go into reverse. I've also got my handbrake over here. And for most racing games, you would almost never play on a keyboard, but this is a fantastic experience. I cannot actually believe I'm saying that, because with drifting especially, you need a lot of control over the throttle. You need to like slightly ease into the throttle, and then you need to like slam on the throttle in order to like extend the drift, or to like control the drift, or to like turn your car sideways so that you can go a little bit further around a plane or something like that. I can't believe that it actually works. But then what's really interesting to me is that after a while of playing this in CarX Racing with the keyboard, I actually was getting higher scores than I would if I was playing on my gamepad. And that was kind of strange to me. And I think part of what really works is that I'm using the same movement on my left hand as I am on my right hand. And what I mean by that is the analog movement that you would use for, oh, hang on a second. Whoop. The analog movement that I would use for my thumb is on my left hand, but the analog movement for my right hand is usually on my index finger, where I'm controlling the shoulder paddles on my controller. Those are two very different kinds of movement, but as I'm using analog movement only with my fingers, and they're all doing the same thing, it's up, down movement on a keyboard, it's actually very easy to compare exactly how far I've pressed on the key on my left hand versus how far I've pushed on the key on my right hand, and I can kind of balance them left and right like this. So something that they say when you're learning how to drive is that you imagine the accelerator pedal is connected to the steering wheel with a string. So like the further you push on the accelerator, the less you can turn, and the further you're turning, the less you can push on the accelerator, and that like gives you a certain amount of control. And that is something that I really experienced while playing this game with a keyboard, because I feel like I'm balancing my two hands like this. I'm like, the further I push on here, the less I want to be pushing on here, and the further I push on here, the less I want to be pushing on here. And because they're exactly the same, they're in the same plane of movement, up and down like this, I'm using the same appendages. I'm using my fingers in order to do it. I just found it was like such a natural thing to learn how to do. Like, I thought it would take me weeks to get used to driving with my keyboard, but really within like minutes, I was like, this is so natural and it makes so much sense. Maybe we should be driving real-life cars with keyboards as well. Maybe that's the future of electric cars. Was not expecting to eventually just end up getting higher scores than I actually get when I play on pad. That was kind of insane. By the way, if you haven't played this game, you should totally get it. While I'm using this keyboard as an analog stick on a regular controller, I should just point out I'm actually in Xbox mode. So this is something that you can enable in the Keychron launcher software. And as a result, when you're in the game, it actually thinks you're using an Xbox controller. And I can show you that because when I go into the pause menu like this, you can see that when I press on the keyboard, it knows to set everything using A, B, X, Y, Xbox controls. And when I actually click over here, I've actually got another keyboard plugged in at the same time. If I press buttons on here, it goes back to keyboard buttons. But then when I put my fingers back on the Keychron and I move these, it goes back to the A, B, X, Y markings. Drifting with a keyboard, driving with a keyboard. This is definitely the way forward. Or the way sideways, as it were. So for me, those are the important things. Performance in a fighting game, but also being able to use analog control even in a racing game. But I will show you just quickly, on the keyboard itself, it does have some other features like RGB. There's a dedicated button here with a light bulb on it. You can actually set this lighting on the keyboard just by pressing this button. So instead of having to always go into the software, you can change the animations just by pressing this dedicated key. Of course, I'm sure that you can actually change this key to be something more useful if you don't find yourself constantly changing the lighting. But while we're talking about the lighting, I just want to point out that I really love that you can see the lights through the actual markings on the keys. Now, I talked about this in a previous video review that I did for a keyboard. And I actually asked keyboard enthusiasts if this was like done on purpose. Do people actually prefer to not have the lighting come through the keys? And I heard that there were some genuine reasons for it. But personally, I'm a much bigger fan of these keyboards where the lighting actually comes through the key so that I can actually see. I do sometimes play either with the lights very dim or off, or it's just too bright outside and it's casting a shadow into my room. Sometimes I just can't see my keyboard. and having the lights actually shine through so I can actually see where the letters are. You know, I hunt and peck sometimes. I'm not always touch typing. This is a big deal for me, being able to see the lights through the markings on the key so I actually know what key is which. When it comes to regular typing, I didn't have any issues with the shapes of these keys. They're concave, but they're kind of scalloped like this instead of being nice and soft on the edges. You do feel the ridges. I guess that's just something you have to get used to. Personally, it didn't seem to be an issue for me. I didn't feel like the ridges really bothered me. Obviously, I'm still not a big fan of having this backspace key being right next to these shortcut keys, but again, you can just go into the software and just unmap these keys. Or if you're crazy like I am, you can just remove the key off the keyboard. That seems to be one of the other ways to fix that. I'm also happy to say that the command key, the Apple icon here, is in a really good position right next to the keyboard because I use this all the time. Also on the side of the keyboard, you have some very simple stuff here. We've got the actual port for the USB-C cable. Over here, we can switch between the Windows, Android, or the Mac mode. And here we've got wired mode in the middle, the left side for wireless dongle, which does come with, and Bluetooth mode. You can sync up to 3 devices, and it's very easy to swap between them. You just press this function button here, and 1, 2, or 3 to switch between your Bluetooth devices. You've also got the Wi-Fi icon right here if you're using the dongle. On the back of the keyboard, you also have a couple of these that you can flip out for a little bit more angle. You've also got 2 different settings for that because there's a mini foot inside the foot here that you can flip out for just a teeny tiny bit of angle. And because it is a mechanical keyboard with a fair amount of girth here, you can also get this. There's a wrist rest that they sent me. Now, I have to admit, I think it's supposed to look cool, like it's got a swirly pattern inside, but personally I just thought it looks like it was kind of broken, like there was some sort of manufacturing defect. I can see what they were trying to go for, but I don't think it came off actually looking premium. It just kind of looks defective. What is kind of annoying is that the pattern on the back is much cooler than the pattern on the front. The pattern on the front kind of looks like someone, I don't know, pulled off the bark of a tree and stuck it onto my wrist rest. On the back, it's actually more swirly. I feel like this is what they wanted it to look like on the front. Anyway, that's an option if you don't already have a wrist rest so that you can get your hands at the right angle so that you're not playing fighting games like this and having your arms tensed up. Just to summarize my thoughts on the Keychron K2HE, I have to say that at $130, and I think it's still in a Kickstarter at the moment. I don't know why it's a Kickstarter because we already know that they're going to make it. I have it in my hands right now. Anyway, if you want to get it on the Kickstarter, I think you get like a $5 discount, so that's going to be timed if you can get yourself a purchase early bird there. They're saying that it's going to be $130, which in my opinion is a massively good deal, but that's because I come from the fighting game world where all controllers are on average a little bit more expensive than they need to be. We haven't really reached that point where economies of scale mean that we can produce stuff like this en masse and at very low prices. But if your gameplay style does work with using a regular keyboard and you play on PC and you play online mostly all the time anyway, then there are so many reasons why this is actually kind of better than all the fighting game controllers, the dedicated ones out there. You can put your buttons anywhere you want on the keyboard, but in addition to that, this is the wireless magnetic version. I think the HE stands for Hall Effect, and so you don't have to worry about key switches breaking out. Like the whole point of this is that you can set it all in software. If I want it to actuate as soon as I touch it, I can. If I want it to only actuate halfway through the key press, I can. If I want to have to bottom out the key all the way before it actually actuates the button, I can. And if I want a rapid trigger, so I only let up 1/10 of a millimeter before I'm allowed to press the button again and re-actuate the switch, you can do that. That's crazy. And then there's the feature that didn't quite work for me, but hopefully will be in the final version, which is the last key pressed mode. But more than just the K2HE itself, what I'm really excited about is the fact that this technology is becoming normal for other genres, and it kind of shows us the future of what we could have in the fighting game scene if this sort of thing is adopted. There was one controller maker at EVO Japan who was showing me traditional style arcade buttons, but they had magnetic Hall effect sensors inside. And so we know that there are some people who are trying to make this happen in the fighting game space. I can't wait to get my hands on a controller like that. But for now, I'm unbelievably impressed by just the fact that these standard key shapes work just fine for fighting games, and there are even some benefits, like even being able to press multiple buttons with a single finger really easily because each key is so small. But in addition, all that stuff I was saying about actuation distances and rapid key triggering, and then there's just the fact that you can use analog control to play racing games with a keyboard. I just love not having to bring around a controller. It's like, I'll just show it with my mouse and my keyboard. I'll just make everything work with this one device. Like, the only way to make this product more perfect for me would be to put one of those IBM ThinkPad nubs in the middle, and then I wouldn't have to carry a mouse either. Hey, there's an idea. Well, that's all for the Keychron K2HE keyboard at only $130. Not only is this thing full of RGB lighting, but it's magnetic and it's wireless, and being able to assign any key that I want to be any analog function that I want that I would normally use on a pad controller. I'm blown away by just how usable that is in gaming, and in some ways maybe even preferable to using a pad controller. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out this video next if you're interested in fighting games, controllers, keyboards, and all that great stuff. I've been NihongoGamer. I'll see you real soon.